Welcome back to the horror storytelling channel Darkness in the Night. Today, I am pleased to introduce a ghost story titled by the Black River. Before we begin, if you find this story engaging, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to support my work. Thank you for listening. Now let's get started. A light rain drizzled over the Yorkshire hills as the last bus of the day stopped at the entrance of Blackthorn village. James stepped down, pulling a grey suitcase from the luggage hold, and drew in a deep breath of the damp, earthy air. The countryside chill was nothing like London's. It pierced his skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Looking around, he saw the scenery unchanged from years ago, a narrow cobblestone road leading into the village. Oak trees shedding their leaves in the wind, and a blanket of murky fog hovering over the distant riverbank. The small village looked silent, almost too quiet. A few dim street lamps cast weak yellow light onto the rain-slick road. James dragged his suitcase along, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Each time the wind blew, he felt as though someone were watching him through the mist. He shook his head, convincing himself it was only the feeling of returning after so long away. The Carter family's house stood at the edge of the village, near the Blackthorn forest. As James reached the gate, he noticed lights glowing from the windows, shadows moving inside. Before he could knock, the door opened and his mother, Mrs. Carter, rushed out to embrace him. Her face looked thinner than before, yet her eyes still shone with warmth. "James, you're home. Oh my, you've gotten so skinny," she said, running her hand through his hair. Behind her, Mr. Carter stood smiling gently, patting his son on the shoulder. The rich aroma of stew drifted from the kitchen, melting away the cold. James stepped inside, relief washing over him with the warmth. Emily, his older sister, emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel still in her hand. "Look at my little brother," Emily teased, a bright smile on her lips. "I thought London made you forget where home was." That night's dinner was filled with laughter. Mr. and Mrs. Carter asked about school, friends, and life in the city. Emily talked about her work at the sewing factory, mentioning Mrs. Margaret and her co-workers. At times, James caught a shadow of sadness in her eyes when she spoke about marriage proposals Mrs. Margaret had suggested. But before he could ask, Emily shifted the subject to this year's harvest. When dinner ended, James helped Emily clear the table. She stood by the window, gazing outside at the thickening fog. "Do you remember the river?" Emily asked softly. "People say strange things have been happening lately. A man from the village went missing last week. They only found his hat by the riverbank." James frowned. "People are still that superstitious? Every year there are rumors like this when the full moon comes." Emily pressed her lips together. "Maybe, but this time, it feels different. Every night I hear the water rushing, like someone thrashing beneath it. And the neighbor swears she saw a figure standing in the middle of the river." Drenched, James looked at her, noticing the flicker of unease in her eyes. He didn't reply, he simply laid a hand gently on her shoulder, as if to reassure her. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, James sat by his bedroom window. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying with it the rustling of leaves from the distant forest. He looked toward the river, but saw only pitch-black darkness. An owl screeched, tearing through the silence, making James flinch. He shut the window, telling himself he had simply grown too used to the constant noise of the city, which made this countryside stillness feel eerier than it should. The next morning, Blackthorn village awoke beneath a heavy blanket of fog. Emily got ready to leave for work early. James walked her to the door. Outside the gate stood Thomas, Mrs. Margaret's son, a tall young man with a kind face, who smiled when he saw James. "You're back, James," Thomas said. "If you're free tonight, come over for dinner. My mother is very fond of you." James nodded. Emily blushed slightly under Thomas's gaze, then quickly hurried off. In the afternoon, James wandered near the forest edge, wanting to breathe in the fresh country air. Blackthorn Forest was beautiful, yet it carried a strange gloom. The trees were thick, their trunks coated with green moss. Passing a narrow path that led toward the river, James suddenly felt as if something were watching him. A branch cracked behind him, and he spun around sharply, but no one was there. Only the dense fog crawled low across the ground. By the time James returned home, dusk had already fallen. Emily was still not back. Mr. and Mrs. Carter grew uneasy, remarking that she was always home by now. James tried to reassure them, suggesting perhaps she had been delayed at the factory. But when the clock struck 8 and Emily had yet to appear, unease gave way to fear. Mr. Carter lit an oil lamp and told James they would search. Together with several villagers, they split up to comb the sewing factory and the riverbanks. The night was thick, the fog smothering their vision. Shouts of "Emily" echoed across the fields, only to be thrown back by the trees. Close to midnight, a man in the search party shouted. Everyone rushed to the riverbank, their lanterns casting trembling light on the water. James's knees buckled at the sight before him. It was Emily, her body drenched, hair plastered to her pale face, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the sky. Mrs. Carter wailed as Emily's lifeless body was pulled from the water. Mr. Carter stood frozen, fists trembling at his sides. James dropped to his knees beside his sister, his heart pounding wildly. A chilling gust swept over the river, rippling the surface, and in that moment, he felt as if Emily's eyes were still fixed on him. The following day, the entire village of Blackthorn was shrouded in mourning. Heavy rain pounded against rooftops and cobblestone streets. The Carter family gathered around Emily's coffin, red candles flickering and casting tall shadows on the walls. James stood still, his gaze fixed on his sister's pale face. The village doctor declared it an accidental drowning. Perhaps she had slipped by the river after dark. James didn't believe it. He remembered her wide-open eyes and the faint bruise on her arm. While everyone busied themselves with funeral arrangements, he quietly questioned the man who had examined the body. The man shook his head, insisting the bruise was nothing unusual, likely from hitting a rock while falling into the river. James clenched his teeth, suspicion burning inside him. That afternoon, the funeral took place, with nearly the entire village in attendance. Strong winds whipped the mourning veils into the air. Mrs. Carter wept until she nearly collapsed. Supported by her husband, James kept his composure, but inside, a storm raged. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, he noticed a strange glint reflecting from the riverbank, like someone was standing there, watching. Narrowing his eyes, he saw only mist as the figure disappeared. After the burial, Thomas came to the house. He looked haggard, his clothes soaked with rain. "I'm so sorry," he rasped. "Emily was the kindest person I've ever known. I swear I'll find out what really happened." James met Thomas's eyes and saw the same grief mirrored there. He nodded. "We'll uncover the truth." That night, long after the household had gone to bed, James lay awake. The wind whistled over the roof, and rain pattered against the windows. Then he heard it, a dripping sound. At first he thought it was a leak, but when he stepped into the hallway, his chest tightened. In the middle of the floor lay a pool of pitch-black water, reeking of something metallic and foul. There was no sign of leakage from the ceiling or the windows. He approached cautiously, realizing the puddle wasn't spreading, it was just sitting there, as if it existed on its own. Footsteps echoed from the living room, making James whirl around. But when he descended the stairs, the room was empty. A cold draft swept through, snuffing out a candle on the table. Goosebumps prickled across his skin. He hurried back upstairs, trying to convince himself it was only exhaustion after the long day. The next morning, James told his parents about the puddle. Mr. and Mrs. Carter insisted it must have been rainwater he had carried in while opening the door. James didn't argue, but deep down he knew he had cleaned it up before going to bed. At noon, James ran into Harold on the village road. Harold was the only son of Edgar, the headman of Blackthorn. He wore a long coat, his face strikingly handsome, though his eyes were cold. "My condolences," Harold said evenly. "Emily was a beautiful girl. Such a shame." James narrowed his eyes. "Do you know what really happened to my sister?" Harold shrugged. "Word is she slipped. This village isn't safe at night. Next time, tell your family to be more careful." James's throat tightened as he noticed the faint smirk curling Harold's lips. an expression devoid of sympathy. His fists clenched. It took everything in him not to strike the man. As Harold walked away, Thomas approached from a distance. "Be careful with him," he whispered. "He used to pursue Emily for a long time. She rejected him outright. He got angry. Once he even threatened she'd regret it." James frowned. "Then why didn't she tell us?" "Emily didn't want to worry the family. Besides, he's the village headman's son. Everyone's afraid of offending the Edgar household." Thomas's words only deepened James's resolve. He began retracing Emily's final days. Many at the sewing factory said that on the day of the accident, Emily had left late, walking home alone. No one saw her afterward. One young girl whispered that she had spotted Harold by the river with Emily that evening, but when James pressed her for details, she only shook her head, saying she wanted no trouble. The following night, the strange occurrences continued. This time James heard 3 knocks at the door in the middle of the night. When he opened it, there was nothing but fog and the hiss of the wind. Returning inside, he froze. On the living room mirror was a watery handprint, dripping as though someone had just pressed against it. James felt certain a message was being sent. The next morning, James went to see old Henry, a village shaman who lived on the edge of the forest. His small house was cluttered with dried herbs, talismans dangling from the beams. Henry studied James intently. "I know why you've come. The river is angry. A soul has not found peace. If you seek the truth, prepare yourself, for it will seek you as well." James met the old man's gaze. "I'm not afraid. I just want to know who killed my sister." Slowly, Henry produced a bundle of black incense sticks, explaining that they would have to wait until the full moon to perform the summoning ritual. On that night, the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. But be warned, what answers the call may not only be the soul you seek. The darkness itself may hear you. James left Henry's hut with a heavy heart. Though a flicker of hope stirred within him, he knew the road ahead would be perilous. But he could not turn back. The shadows around Blackthorn seemed to thicken by the day. And in his heart, he felt Emily was out there, waiting for him to uncover the truth. The full moon night descended on Blackthorn beneath a fog so thick that the street lamps looked like faint, floating embers. James pulled on a heavy coat, lantern in hand, and followed the narrow path toward Henry's house. Dogs howled in the distance, as if warning of ill fate. When James arrived, old Henry was already waiting at the door, holding an oil lamp, his wrinkled face etched with solemn lines. "You've come," Henry said, his voice gravelly. "We must go to the forest's edge, near the river. That is where the spirit will hear us best." Thomas was there too, his face pale but his eyes burning with determination. "I'm coming. I want to hear Emily's voice one last time." The 3 of them crossed the fields, their footsteps crunching on wet grass. Cold wind lashed against their faces, carrying the earthy stench of damp soil. As they neared the river, the sound of running water grew stronger, but there was something strange about it. It was heavy, deep, as though the river itself was breathing. Henry marked a circle of salt on the ground and lit 4 black candles at the corners. He brought out a small bell, a bowl of water, and slips of paper inscribed with ancient symbols. Thomas sat across from James, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The ritual began. Henry chanted in a rolling, guttural rhythm, his voice rising and falling. The wind picked up, fog thickening and curling around them. James's skin prickled, his breath turning into white mist. Suddenly, the bowl of water before them darkened. The clear liquid turned pitch black, reeking of iron and rot. James clenched his fists, heart pounding in his chest. "The spirit is coming," Henry whispered. The candles sputtered. Then one went out. The wind ceased. Silence pressed down, suffocating. Then James heard it, a whisper. Faint at first, then growing clearer. "James?" He snapped his head up, eyes darting around. The voice came again, this time right beside his ear, making him flinch. Thomas began to tremble, his eyes rolling back. A voice not his own poured from his mouth. "James, help me, it wasn't an accident." The voice was broken, gasping. James grabbed Thomas's hand. "Emily, is that you? Who did this to you?" Thomas's body convulsed. "Harold, He pushed me into the river, laughed when I begged, his father covered it up." The voice shrieked, and James's blood ran cold. The remaining candles flared violently, then snuffed out at once. Darkness swallowed the circle whole. A swirling wind tore around them, carrying the stench of rotting mud. For an instant, Emily's figure appeared before James, her hair soaked, skin ghostly pale, eyes blank and white. She reached out a trembling hand, lips moving soundlessly. "Don't let him escape." Henry's bell rang sharply, shattering the vision. Thomas collapsed, gasping for breath. The bowl of black water shattered, its contents seeping into the earth before vanishing. Henry lifted Thomas upright. "The ritual is over, but her soul is not at peace. You've heard the truth. From now on, you must not only seek justice for your sister, you must also face the darkness Harold summoned when he turned to forbidden rites." James panted, sweat chilling his back. He turned toward the river. The water rippled, bubbling into small whirlpools. For a heartbeat, he saw a shadow moving in the current, a towering figure, vague as smoke. As they left the forest, James knew his life would never be the same. Emily had called to him from beyond death. Now, he was bound to expose Harold's crime, and to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. Something not of this world. The full moon had long set, yet the night over Blackthorn still felt swallowed by a heavy darkness. James returned home after the ritual with Thomas and Henry, Emily's screams still echoing in his head. Sleep was impossible. He sat at his desk, the candlelight flickering weakly. Near midnight, a dripping sound echoed somewhere inside the house. James rose and followed it. As he descended the stairs, he saw it again, the pool of pitch-black water in the living room. Larger this time, it bubbled, releasing a stench so foul it choked him. Kneeling, he touched its edge. His fingertip went numb instantly. Freezing cold, he jerked his hand back. Suddenly, 3 loud knocks pounded against the door, heavy, like hammer blows. James jumped to his feet, heart racing. When he flung the door open, there was nothing, only thick fog curling in the night air. Closing the door, he turned to find wet footprints leading away from the puddle. Up the stairs, shuddering, James grabbed his lantern and followed. The prints led to Emily's room. The door creaked open slightly with the wind. Inside, everything remained as it had been when Emily was alive. Her sewing table, her wardrobe, the family photograph resting on her vanity. But in the photo, Emily's face looked faded, drained of color. James stepped closer. On the mirror above the vanity, a fresh streak of water had formed a crude circle. He reached out, and instantly, the glass darkened. In the reflection, he saw himself, but behind him stood a girl with dripping hair, clothes smeared in mud. Watching silently, he spun around. The room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, leaving only a wet handprint pressed against the glass. The bedroom door slammed shut, locking by itself. The candlelight snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. A whisper brushed his ear. "James, under the river? Find the button?" He pounded on the door until it burst open, a gust of wind whipping the curtains like shrouds. James stumbled out, chest heaving, sweat soaking his back. The next morning, he told Thomas what had happened. Thomas frowned. "A button? She wants you to find something by the river." "Evidence," James said firmly. "If we find it, Harold will have to face his crime." That afternoon, they went to the riverbank. Blackthorn River lay silent, its waters muddy and still. They searched through the grass and mud. James spotted a patch of earth freshly disturbed. Digging with his hands, he uncovered a small, hard object. It was a metal button, with the letter H engraved on the back. Thomas's eyes widened. "That's from Harold's coat. I saw him wear it last winter." James clenched the button in his fist. At last, part of the truth in his hand. But before he could speak, the river roared. Waves rippled violently, as if something was forcing its way up from the depths. A shadow rose from the water, its form indistinct, only its glowing white eyes visible. The wind howled, fog twisting around them. The figure let out a guttural scream, the sound like a drowning soul. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, It sank back beneath the surface. The river lay calm again. James and Thomas exchanged a terrified look. Their hearts pounding. "Someone's angry," Thomas whispered. "And it's not just Emily. There's something else in that river." That night, James locked the button safely in his desk drawer. He felt Emily's presence near him. No longer terrifying but protective. "Don't worry, sister," he whispered. "I'll bring you justice." But as he blew out the candle, the darkness thickened again. A low laugh echoed through the room, deep, cruel, and inhuman. It was not Emily's voice. The back of James's neck went cold. He realized then that while his sister had called to him, something else had heard him too. And it was waiting. That night, Mrs. Carter awoke from a restless dream. She heard a noise in the kitchen, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. When she went downstairs, the oil lamp flickered weakly. Everything was in place, except the window stood wide open. She moved to shut it, but then froze. Out in the garden stood a figure in a dress. Her back turned. "Emily?" she whispered. The figure turned, a pale face, hair dripping wet, eyes blank and white, staring straight through her. Mrs. Carter screamed, collapsing to the floor. In an instant, the figure vanished, and the window slammed shut. James rushed down, lifting his mother. After hearing her story, his belief grew stronger. Emily's soul had not moved on. "She's trying to tell us something," he said, voice trembling. "It's not just me, Mother. She's warning all of us." The next morning, James sought out Henry for answers. The old man's expression was grave. "You've found the button, which means the truth is close. But it also means you've touched something beyond your understanding." "You mean the shadow in the river?" James asked. Henry nodded. "That thing is not a human soul. It is what Harold awoke when he performed his ritual in the forest. It is a guardian of sorts. It will not stop until it has taken enough blood to cleanse the corruption." A chill ran down James's spine. "You're saying, it won't only kill Harold? If you don't end this soon, anyone connected to it could be claimed. The river forgets no one." Meanwhile, at the Edgar household, Harold stumbled home from the tavern, reeking of alcohol. As he adjusted his collar in the mirror, he noticed his shoulder drenched. Looking down, he saw mud smeared across his clothes, as if he'd waded through the river. He scrubbed it clean, but when he raised his head, the mirror no longer showed his face, it showed Emily's. Pale and bruised, lips blue with death, Harold screamed and smashed the mirror. The noise brought Edgar storming in. "Another vision of that girl?" Edgar growled. "Father, she's following me. I saw her in the mirror." Edgar's brow furrowed, his grip firm on Harold's shoulder. "Calm yourself. No one can prove anything. If they find evidence, I'll handle it." "You don't understand," Harold shouted, his voice cracking, teetering on madness. "It's not human." The next day, James and Thomas returned to the riverbank, digging deeper near the place where they had found the button. Their efforts uncovered another object, a wooden talisman etched with strange markings. When Henry examined it, his voice dropped low. "This is a sigil of demon binding. Someone used it to bargain for power, usually in exchange for blood, or a soul." Thomas's face drained of color. If Harold really performed this ritual, it means he brought a demon into this village. That evening, as the Carter family prepared for supper, the knocking returned, but this time, not 3 knocks, endless pounding, relentless like hammer strikes. Mr. Carter opened the door. On the porch lay a large pool of black water. Floating in its center was Emily's handkerchief, soaked in mud. Silence gripped the room. Mrs. Carter trembled as she picked up the handkerchief, clutching it to her chest. James stared into the thickening fog outside, a gnawing certainty rising within him. Something was coming closer. That night, James could not sleep. The knocking returned again, this time at his window. When he turned, a wet handprint was pressed against the glass. Slowly, the hand dragged downward, leaving behind a long, streaking trail that glistened red, like diluted blood. The full moon returned, and Blackthorn was once again suffocated under a choking fog. Not only the Carter family, but many others in the village began speaking of strange happenings. Mrs. Margaret, the factory owner, claimed she had heard someone singing a lullaby outside her window at midnight, but when she opened it, Only the river was churning, with not a soul in sight. Dogs howled endlessly. Some refused to eat, their eyes red as if possessed. James stood by the riverbank, the button and wooden talisman heavy in his coat pocket. Thomas stood beside him, lantern in hand, his expression tense. "We can't just sit and wait. That thing is getting stronger," Thomas said. "We need to know exactly what happened." James replied, his voice taut as wire. "If Harold truly awakened it, he has to pay. But first, we must free Emily." They went to Henry, asking him to perform a stronger summoning ritual. At first, the old man shook his head. "This ritual is dangerous. If performed incorrectly, Emily's soul could be trapped forever, or that creature might exploit the gateway we open." "We accept that risk," James said firmly. "If we do nothing, it will only grow worse." That night, in the depths of Blackthorn Forest, Henry drew a protective circle with white chalk, planted 4 candles at the corners, and lit ceremonial incense. The wind through the trees wailed like mourning cries. James sat within the circle, clutching Emily's handkerchief tightly. Henry began his chant. The air grew deathly cold, their breaths turning white. The ground trembled faintly. A pale figure slowly appeared within the circle, Emily. Her eyes were still blank, but less violent than before. "James," her voice echoed as if rising from the riverbed. "He pushed me into the water. In his eyes, I saw it, that shadow. It laughed as I drowned." Tears blurred James's vision. "Sister, I swear he will pay. But tell me, how can I set you free?" Emily lifted a trembling hand, pointing into the dark forest. "Destroy the talisman, at the withered tree by the forest's edge, where he performed the ritual. Burn it under moonlight. His blood must touch the earth. Only then will I rest." Suddenly, the wind roared, a guttural scream ripping through the night. The black shadow appeared at the edge of the circle, towering, its form shifting, eyes glowing like fire. It lunged at the barrier. The candles quivered violently. Henry shouted, "Hold the circle. Do not let it break." Thomas gripped James's arm as they both backed into the center. The shadow shrieked, then dissolved into mist. Emily's figure faded, giving a sorrowful smile before vanishing completely. The candles extinguished. Silence returned, but James knew their time was running out. Meanwhile, at the Edgar house, Harold crouched in a corner, eyes sunken, hair disheveled, muttering to someone unseen. Edgar stormed in, furious. "You've shamed me. The whole village is whispering. Stand up." Harold looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You don't understand. It's here. It touches me every night. It's coming for me." Edgar slapped him hard. "Enough. You must hold yourself together until this blows over." But as he turned to leave, the door slammed shut. The lamp snuffed out. Heavy, ragged breathing filled the darkness. Harold screamed, throwing himself at the door, his hands bleeding as he pounded. Edgar pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. From inside came a deep, rasping laugh, so monstrous it froze the old man's blood. When the door finally burst open, Harold lay sprawled on the floor, trembling violently, muttering a single phrase over and over. "At the withered tree, it waits for me." For the first time in years, Edgar felt true fear. Back at the Carter house, James sat by the window, staring into the fog. He knew the end was drawing near. There was only one path forward, to confront Harold, and drive him to the forest's edge. To complete the ritual that would free Emily, before the shadow claimed another soul. The next morning, the fog still clung to Blackthorn, draping the village like a funeral shroud. People gathered in the square, whispering about the night's terrors. Mrs. Margaret swore she had heard the cries of a baby outside her factory. Another man swore he had seen someone standing in the middle of the river at midnight. But when he approached, there was nothing. Fear hung heavy in the air, thick as the mist. From a distance, James watched, the weight of it all pressing down on his shoulders. Thomas approached, handing him a small pouch. "Salt and charcoal. Henry says we'll need these to finish the ritual." James nodded. "Then all we're missing is Harold." They laid out a plan. Thomas would confront Harold, luring him to the withered tree with the promise of new evidence. James would prepare the protective circle and ready the talisman for burning. Meanwhile, Harold wandered his home like a ghost. Sleepless, his eyes sunken and his hands trembling. Every time he glimpsed his reflection, Emily's pale, dripping face stared back at him with a mocking smile. Edgar tried to soothe him, but even he was shaken. Those midnight knocks haunted him, too, leaving him restless and worn. That afternoon, Thomas found Harold at the tavern. "I know what you did," he said bluntly. Harold's glassy eyes lifted. "You see it too, don't you? It won't let me go. You have one chance to end this," Thomas said firmly. "Tonight, at the forest's edge, we can help free you from it." Harold gave a hollow laugh. The sound of a man breaking. "Help me? No one can. It wants blood. It wants the end. Then give it the end," Thomas replied coldly. "Or live in terror until it takes you itself." Harold stared for a long moment, then gave a stiff nod. "Tonight, but if this is a trick, I'll kill you first." When night fell, James and Thomas prepared the protective circle beneath the withered tree. The full moon hung high, casting a cold, bluish glow. Henry arrived with his bell and incense, ready to guide the ritual. "Remember," he warned, "once Harold enters the circle, burn the talisman at once. But his blood must touch the ground. Without that, the ritual will fail." Footsteps echoed. Harold emerged from the fog, disheveled, his coat half hanging from his shoulders. He stepped into the clearing, eyes darting into the dark woods as though something stalked him. "Hurry," he muttered. "I won't stay here long." James drew out the talisman. "First, you tell the truth. All of it." Harold hesitated, his gaze flickering. Then he gave a bitter laugh. "Fine. That night, she followed me to the river. I only wanted to scare her. But she screamed, said she'd expose me to the village. I lost control. I shoved her. She fell. And I just stood there, watching her thrash until she sank." The forest air turned icy, the wind shrieking through the branches. From the edge of the clearing, the shadow appeared, taller than before, its eyes burning like twin flames. Harold stumbled back, terror twisting his face. "Do something," he screamed. "It's here." James took the knife, slicing Harold's hand. Blood dripped into the circle, seeping into the earth. Henry's voice rang out, "Burn the talisman now." Thomas lit the flame. Green fire erupted, roaring bright enough to light the whole forest. The shadow howled, a sound that split the night sky. Wind blasted through, snuffing out lanterns and candles, leaving only the moonlight and the raging fire. Harold collapsed, clutching his head, screaming, "Leave me, I beg you." But the shadow didn't retreat. It advanced, each step shaking the ground. James's stomach dropped. The fire wasn't enough. Henry shouted over the roar, "It's not finished. Force him to confess before Emily's soul, now." The wind howled through the treetops, like hundreds of voices screaming as one. The protective circle shook violently. The fire on the talisman crackled, casting a sickly blue glow that made their faces look like the dead. Harold collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "Stop, I've told you everything." James gripped the knife tighter, his blood roaring in his ears. "No, you must face the one you murdered. Emily." Her name struck the air like a command. A wave of icy wind swept over them. Within the circle, a pale figure shimmered into being. Ghostly beneath the moonlight, Emily stood there, her face wan, but her eyes no longer vacant. She stared straight at Harold. He screamed, scrambling back toward the circle's edge. "Stay away from me." Emily said nothing. She stepped closer. With each step, the ground grew damp, reeking of stagnant water. "Harold Edgerson," Henry intoned, his voice solemn and deep. "Before the spirit of the dead and under the full moon's light. Do you confess your crime?" Harold gasped, sweat pouring down his face. The shadow at the edge of the circle shrieked, stretching misty arms toward him. "Yes, I killed her. I pushed Emily into the river and left her to die. I regret it. Spare me." Emily closed her eyes. A single black tear slid down her cheek. At once, the circle flared with light, the fire surging higher. The shadow recoiled, screeching, as if repelled by an unseen force. But it did not retreat. Instead, It turned its gaze on Harold, its white eyes blazing. A violent gust knocked everyone back. Harold was lifted into the air, screaming, "Hold the circle!" Henry roared, his voice ragged. James and Thomas scattered salt along the edges, reinforcing the barrier. The fire flared red, painting the forest in a bloody glow. Emily stepped closer to Harold, reaching out a hand. He writhed, sobbing, "Please, don't, I don't want to die." Her voice rang clear now, no longer carried on the wind, but strong and undeniable. "Justice has come." The wind stopped suddenly. Then the shadow lunged, breaching the circle as if the boundary no longer existed. It wrapped Harold in its misty tendrils, dragging him into the darkness of the forest. Harold shrieked, clawing at the earth, leaving bloody streaks as he was pulled away. James started forward, but Henry seized his arm. "No, the ritual is finished. He must pay." Harold's screams echoed long into the night, then fell silent. The forest stilled. The fire went out, leaving only the moonlight glinting on the blackened circle. Emily turned back to James. For the first time since her death, her face was peaceful. She smiled faintly, nodded once, and dissolved into 1,000 tiny lights drifting skyward. James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Thomas laid a hand on his shoulder. Silent, Henry exhaled heavily. "She is free now," he murmured, "but the forest will never forget this night. Harold's blood will serve as its eternal reminder." When the three of them left the woods, they found villagers gathered at a distance, drawn by the firelight and screams. None dared ask what had happened. Only Mrs. Carter stepped forward, taking her son's hand. "You did it," she whispered. The sun crept over the horizon, painting Blackthorn's lingering mist in pale orange. James, Thomas, and Henry returned home just before dawn. The Carter family had stayed awake all night, their faces etched with worry and fear. Mrs. Carter threw her arms around James the moment he stepped through the door. "You're not hurt, are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. James shook his head. "No, Mother, it's done. Emily, she's at peace now." Silence settled over the house, broken only by the sound of relieved breaths. Then Mr. Carter drew a half-burned talisman from his pocket and placed it on Emily's altar. "Rest now, my daughter," he whispered, his eyes wet with grief. That morning, the village buzzed with rumors. People spoke of strange lights in the forest, of Harold's screams and the wind that had sounded like weeping. A search party went into the woods to look for Harold, but all they found was a trail of churned soil and deep claw marks raking across the earth, leading all the way to the riverbank, where they vanished. There was no body, no further trace. "Maybe the river took him," one man suggested, but the elders shook their heads grimly. "No, the river doesn't claim a man like that. The forest took its debt." Police soon arrived, carrying a warrant for Harold's arrest on charges of murder. But when told he was missing, they could only file a temporary report. Edgar, the village headman, fell suddenly and gravely ill. He could speak no clear words, only mutterings that sounded like pleas for forgiveness. That night, James found himself unable to sleep. He stepped outside, standing by the river where Emily's body had once been found. The thin mist drifted along the surface of the water. "Sister," he murmured, "it's over now. I promise, I'll live for both of us." A cold breeze stirred. James looked up and glimpsed Emily's figure on the opposite bank. She stood serene, her face gentle, her long black hair still wet but free of weeds and mud. She smiled softly, nodded once, and faded into the mist. James closed his eyes, a strange relief flooding through him. But as he turned to head back inside, a faint sound drifted from the forest beyond, something dragging through dry leaves. He froze, heart pounding. From the darkness came a rasping laugh, low and distant, yet unmistakable. It was not Harold's. It was not any living man's. James clenched his fists and drew a steady breath. He knew the story was not over. Above, clouds rolled in to smother the moon, and Blackthorn once again sank into impenetrable night. 3 days after the ritual, Blackthorn was no longer the peaceful village it once seemed. In daylight, people still smiled and went about their business. But when night fell, no one dared step outside. The wind through the forest had changed, carrying whispers like distant voices. Children claimed they saw a man staggering at the forest's edge, his eyes white, his clothes in tatters, but when adults went to look, they found only muddy footprints that ended abruptly in midair. James grew restless. He sought out Henry, who was burning a bundle of herbs, white smoke curling thick in the air. "You sense something, don't you?" James asked. Henry's voice was grave. "The curse isn't over. Emily's death was only one thread. What was awakened in the forest now demands more than a single life." Thomas soon joined them, his face drawn tight. "Then what do we do? We can't let the village live in fear forever." Henry nodded. "We must trace the curse to its origin. Where it began, it must end. There is a place, the ruins of Stonehollow, deep in the forest. It is said that Blackthorn's first dark rituals were held there." That night, James and Thomas followed Henry into the woods, carrying oil lamps, daggers, and a sack of salt. The trail to Stonehollow seemed endless. The hoot of owls and the snap of twigs underfoot blended into a dirge of death. Near midnight, they reached a clearing. At its center lay a circle of black stones, slick with moss. A tall monolith stood in the middle, its surface etched with strange symbols. James approached and laid his hand on the stone. A chill shot down his spine. In an instant, a vision seared his mind: hooded figures kneeling around the pillar, blood dripping into the soil, guttural chants echoing through the night. A voice whispered inside his head, "You have opened the door. Now you must step through." He stumbled back, gasping, "Did you see that?" Thomas and Henry stared at him with alarm. "No," Henry said firmly, "but we shouldn't linger here." Then a shrill, piercing laugh echoed from deep within the forest, freezing their blood. Their lamps flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the clearing whole. A towering shadow emerged at the edge of the stone circle. No longer vague, it now resembled a man's form, its eyes burning like embers. It didn't attack, it only stared, raising one hand slowly toward James. "Go," Henry shouted. The three of them bolted, tearing down the path. Heavy footsteps thundered behind them, close enough to shake the earth. But as soon as they burst from the forest's edge, the sound ceased. Back at the Carter home, James's hand still trembled. "What does it want from me?" he demanded. Henry's gaze was unyielding. "You touched the stone. Now it marks you as chosen. Perhaps to end the curse, or perhaps as its next sacrifice." Thomas gripped James's shoulder. "Then we'll find the truth. We need to uncover what really happened at Stonehollow centuries ago. If we don't, more people will die." Outside the window, the wind howled, carrying with it a whisper that curled into the room, calling James's name. The next morning, screams echoed through Blackthorn. A shepherd had found 3 sheep lying dead at the forest's edge, their bodies torn apart as if by claws. On the ground, streaks of black mud stretched all the way to the riverbank. "This is a bad omen," an old woman whispered, trembling. "The forest no longer sleeps." James, Thomas, and Henry knew they needed answers, and quickly. They went to the village's old library, a crumbling building tucked into a corner of Blackthorn. The wooden door creaked as they pushed it open, dust rising like smoke in the stale air. Henry rummaged through the shelves until he pulled out a leather-bound ledger. Brittle but still legible. On its cover, faded words read, "Chronicles of Blackthorn 1702." James carefully flipped the pages, reading by the dim light. In that year, plague swept through the village. The elders decreed a sacrifice to beg for salvation. Human blood spilled upon the Stonehollow altar. But instead of mercy, the darkness was summoned. It accepted the offering, and then demanded more. James swallowed hard. "They sacrificed people?" Henry nodded gravely. "And from then on, whenever innocent blood touched the soil near the river, it stirred again. Emily's death, it was the trigger that reopened the cycle." Thomas pointed to another section of the text, where the same sigils carved into the Stonehollow monolith were sketched. "It says here, only one of the bloodline that forged the pact can break the curse. **. James froze. "The Carters have lived here for centuries. You're saying, me?" Henry's expression hardened. "Most likely. You may be the last of that line. You can close the door, but there will be a price." Before James could ask what that price was, a loud noise rattled the window. All three turned sharply. A pool of black water was spreading across the library floor, its stench of iron and rot choking the air. From it, a skeletal hand rose, clawing at the wooden boards. Thomas staggered back, pale. "It's inside the village now." Henry quickly scattered salt in a circle around the puddle. The hand recoiled, vanishing with a furious shriek that reverberated through the room. James clutched his chest, the pressure on him almost unbearable. "If I don't act, the whole village will be consumed," he said, voice firm despite the fear clawing at him. "Tonight, we go back to Stonehollow. I'll perform whatever ritual it takes to end this." Henry placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Be prepared. The sealing ritual demands an exchange. It may claim your life." James fell silent, his gaze dark. He thought of Emily, her smile before she dissolved into light. He knew there was no other choice. That night, the full moon hung pale and heavy above, casting its cold light along the forest path. James, Thomas, and Henry carried everything needed for the ritual: black candles, a circle of salt, a dagger, and the ancient book. Stonehollow lay shrouded in suffocating fog, the stone circle standing silent in the clearing, cold as death itself. As James stepped inside, he felt the weight of countless unseen eyes pressing against him. Henry carefully traced a protective ring of salt around the monolith and placed 4 candles at the cardinal points. "You must read this passage," he told James, pressing the book into his hands. "Once you begin, you cannot stop. Fail, and it will claim you." James nodded, kneeling before the stone pillar. He opened the book, his voice trembling but resolute as he recited. Asterisk. "Blood once called you forth. Blood now sends you back. The door opened, now it must close. Return the darkness to where it belongs." As he spoke, the ground shuddered beneath him. The candles flared, their flames burning a deep blood red. A guttural roar rose from the forest, and the shadow emerged, towering, more solid than ever before. It hurled itself at the salt circle, shrieking as it slammed against the barrier. James bit into his palm, letting his blood drip onto the monolith. The crimson seeped into the cracks, glowing faintly. The shadow writhed, its form twisting violently as though being torn apart. "Keep going," Henry shouted. James clutched the book tighter, chanting faster. Thomas crouched low, reinforcing the salt rain as wind lashed at it, trying to scatter it. Invisible force ripped across the clearing, rocks and dirt lifting into the air. The shadow's limbs multiplied, clawing at the circle, reaching for James. One smoky arm nearly seized him when Thomas lunged forward, slashing it with his dagger. The shadow howled, recoiling. James forced out the final words. Asterisk. Blood for blood. Soul for soul. The door is sealed, the spirit freed. A blinding white light burst from the monolith, tearing through the fog. The shadow screamed as its body unraveled into smoke, dragged backward into the stone. With a thunderous crack, the monolith split open, its fragments scattering across the ground like shards of bone. James collapsed, gasping. The forest was eerily still, no wind, no footsteps, only silence. Thomas hauled him to his feet. "Are you all right?" James nodded weakly. "It's gone, at least for now." Henry stared at the shattered stones, his face caught between relief and unease. "The door has closed, but darkness always searches for another path. You stopped it, but you may not have escaped its gaze." As they made their way out of the forest, James felt it, the cold prickle of eyes on his back. At the tree line, he turned for one last look. In the center of the clearing, a faint light hovered, then winked out, leaving only the night. 3 days after the sealing ritual, Blackthorn seemed reborn. Villagers returned to their work. Children played in the streets. No screams split the night. No black puddles oozed across the ground. That evening, for the first time in weeks, James sank into deep, dreamless sleep. But when the moon climbed high, he jolted awake. The room was pitch black. No moonlight spilled through his window. He pulled back the curtain. Clouds smothered the sky. The moon gone as if erased. A knock sounded, slow, deliberate, 3 times. James held his breath, stepping into the dark hallway. Everyone else slept. The knock came again, heavier. From the front door, he lit a candle and crept forward. When he opened the door, a pool of black water lay on the threshold. In its surface, his reflection wavered, but it wasn't his face. It was Emily's, eyes pale and empty, lips moving soundlessly. James staggered back, heart hammering. The candle sputtered out. A freezing wind swept inside. From the walls came a chorus of whispers. You closed the door. But I did not vanish. You are mine. All across Blackthorn, every lamp guttered out at once. The village drowned in a suffocating night. From the forest came footsteps, dozens, hundreds, like a procession of the dead advancing. Thomas burst from his room, his face bloodless. James, it's back. Mrs. Carter clung to him while Mr. Carter threw the bolt across the door. But the wood shook violently, as if something immense pounded from outside. Henry appeared, clutching a smoldering bundle of herbs. His voice was grim. The forest no longer binds it. Now it is free. A scream ripped the air, so piercing it rattled the house. The door blew inward, wind tearing through, scattering everything. In the dim chaos stood a towering figure, its eyes blazing. James gripped the ritual dagger, heart racing. If it wants me, I'll lead it away. I won't let my family die for me. Thomas grabbed his arm. No, it will kill you. Better me than all of you, James said, his eyes fierce. Henry nodded solemnly, pressing a final talisman into James's palm. If you mean to face it, go to the river. Where it began, it must end. James drew a breath and stepped out into the storm of shadows. The footsteps followed close. From every corner of the village, smaller shapes crawled forth, lining the path, herding him toward the river. At the water's edge, mist boiled so thick he could barely see. The river glistened black, endless, and then, it rose. The great shadow towered before him, tall as a tree, its eyes twin moons burning in the fog. If it's me you want, James shouted into the dark, take me, but leave this village in peace. The creature's laughter rasped and rolled across both banks of the river. It reached out, arms impossibly long, the wind whipping through James's hair as its hand descended. The shadow stood motionless, staring at James like a judge at trial. Its glowing eyes reflected not only his face, but Emily's. Her expression, trapped within, was one of pleading despair. James's grip tightened on the ritual dagger. It holds her soul as a hostage. Henry's voice rang out behind him. The old man had followed to the riverbank, breath ragged. If you destroy it, Emily's spirit will be consumed. But if you don't, it will kill everyone. James froze between two impossible choices, his sister or the entire village. The shadow roared, the ground trembling beneath its voice. The river boiled, black bubbles bursting. From its surface, pale hands erupted, souls of the wrongfully dead. They clutched at James's legs, dragging him toward the water. He slashed wildly, blade flashing, water sprayed. Let me go, he shouted. The shadow advanced, its branch-like arms stretching, wrapping tight around him. Henry chanted feverishly, hurling sacred herbs into the air. Smoke hissed against the shadow's skin, making it shriek and recoil. But the force hurled Henry back, slamming him into the mud. Blood trickled from his forehead. James dropped beside him, hearing the rasp of a dying voice. Use the talisman, but remember, it demands blood. Without sacrifice, it will rise again. The shadow lunged. James backed against the river's edge, pulling out the talisman, his jaw clenched. If blood is what it needs, then it will have mine. He slashed his palm, crimson spilling across the charm. Instantly, it flared with searing green light. The shadow writhed, its form twisting violently. Trying to escape, James surged forward, pressing the talisman against its chest. A thunderous explosion cracked the night. The riverbank blazed with blinding light. The mist dissolved, the ghostly hands vanished, and Emily appeared one last time beside him, her hair no longer matted. Her face serene, she smiled softly. You've done it, her voice chimed, clear and gentle. Now I can go. Light engulfed her, and she faded like morning fog. The shadow unraveled, its form collapsing into a pool of black water that thinned, then vanished completely. James collapsed, gasping, his body trembling. Thomas and a handful of villagers rushed in, lifting Henry from the mud. The old man's lips curved into a weary smile. "You have broken the cycle. The village is free." A gentle rain began to fall, washing the last traces of blood from the riverbank. Above them, the clouds parted, and the full moon returned, shining clean and bright. The next morning, Blackthorn awoke from its night of chaos. The heavy fog was gone, replaced by the fresh scent of damp earth and the sound of birdsong. Villagers gathered in the square, their faces a mixture of wonder and relief. By the river, James sat with his bandaged hand, watching the water run clear. Thomas joined him, handing over a cup of hot tea. "We survived," Thomas said, his eyes rimmed with red. James gave a faint smile. "Not all of us. Henry gave his life to save ours." Their gazes shifted to the small graveyard, where the old man had been laid to rest at dawn. A sprig of dried herbs lay atop his grave, its fragrance drifting softly in the breeze. That afternoon, the Carter family held a quiet ceremony for Emily. No wind howled, no black water seeped from the ground. Peace settled over the village at last, as though the land itself was exhaling after a long nightmare. When night came, James stood alone at the riverbank. Moonlight shimmered across the surface. He whispered softly, "Sister, I'm going home. Rest well." A gentle breeze rippled the water, and for a moment, Emily's smiling face appeared, then dissolved into moonlight. James turned back toward the village, but after a few steps, he froze. The river had gone eerily still. For a heartbeat, his reflection warped, its eyes glowing white, like the shadow he had faced. His chest tightened. Then, just as quickly, the image returned to normal. James drew a long breath and walked on, telling himself it was only his mind playing tricks. Deep in the blackthorn forest, a faint laugh drifted through the trees, soft as the wind. No one heard it but James. He clenched his bandaged fist, his eyes resolute. If the darkness had not truly vanished, he would be ready. And so this story comes to an end. Thank you for listening until this final moment. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. That support means so much and helps us create even more haunting tales for you. If you have questions or notice any mistakes in the story, share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. And from *bong toi trong dem*. We'll see you again in the next tale.